All right, guys. Well, I'm here with Paul Carter, who is the chairman and CFO of HMA. How you doing, sir?
Doing fine. Thanks for having me.
So HMA, let's talk about that. Hawaii Mainland Administrators. You guys are what? Home office in Hawaii, origins in Hawaii. What's the story there?
Well, there is a story to how that name came about. There used to be another HMA, Health Management Associates, Inc. That was a company that we had sold back in 2011. And a few months after that, we decided that we were going to reacquire certain of the assets that we had just sold. One of them being our TPA and the technology system that we had built and paid for when we owned HMA, the first HMA. So that was an asset acquisition. So anytime you do an asset acquisition, you got to have a new place to put your newly acquired asset.
I see, yeah.
We wanted to keep the HMA name, so we have an operational center in Hawaii, and we've been in Hawaii since 2001 with that operational center, and so we came up with Hawaii Mainland Administrators.
I was going to say that's almost like serendipitous, the ability to name it Hawaii Mainland. The HMA acronym fit like a glove.
It fit perfectly, and have had a lot of comments, interestingly enough, and probably not very surprising. Everybody wants to go inspect the Hawaii office.
Yeah, I just want to see what you guys are doing. I'm waiting for that invite to Hawaii. But so you guys, I know you're based out of Tempe, Arizona,
we are.
Which I want to make sure we mention that. And before we move on, I do want to mention you're the only guest I've had so far. I think this will be episode, 65 maybe or so. You're the only one that's come to see me in a motorhome, man. So I want to say thank you for doing that, and I want to hear a little bit about your trip from Tempe, Arizona to Frisco, Texas in a motorhome. How'd that go?
Well, I did, in fact, drive out.
You were on time and everything, man. I was impressed.
I pre-COVID, I lived in an airport, lived in an airplane, used to fly 4 or 5 times a month. Post-COVID, I probably have flown 15 times total since February of 2000. And quite frankly, especially the more recent flights, it's not been a very pleasurable experience. So if I'm going somewhere where I have multiple stops and it's going to be a multi-day trip, I'll try to my best to figure out logistically how to go in the motorhome. If I'm going somewhere for a day or just a 2-day thing or whatever, then I'll fly. But I'm going from here. I'm going to go meet with Madeline Smith tonight, and then going to Pittsburgh for a few meetings next week. So it's a multi-stop trip.
And then just all the way back from Pittsburgh back to Tempe? Oh, man. Well, so lots of windshield time, as we were talking about earlier, as a salesperson, or people understand that terminology. You get plenty of time to think, plenty of time to take phone calls, have conference calls. And then I like the road, man. I'm with you there. I used to travel up to Oklahoma City and Tulsa quite a bit in my car. I've done the West Texas trip in my car a couple times. And there's just something about you and the open road and your thoughts and, taking some phone calls along the way. So that's awesome. And when you told me that, I was like, oh, that's pretty exciting. And Madeline Smith, I want to give her a shout out. She hooked us up, right? She connected us. I know she was supposed to be on the podcast, had some scheduling conflicts. So she actually presented me two guests in return. So I got 2 for the price of one from her. So thank you to Madeline for that. The other thing I was going to ask you about is kind of your backstory, right? I don't want to dive too much into HMA before people get a sense of kind of who you are, Paul. And I know you've been at HMA for 27 plus years now, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that's gone on in almost 3 decades. So tell me a little bit about who you are and how you even got into this business in the first place.
Well, I grew up just south of Pittsburgh, so go Steelers. Being in Texas, I think there's a few Cowboy fans around.
There's a handful,
which is a
it's
a problem.
Probably not a huge fan. You're a Steelers fan, but that's okay. We'll let it slide.
When you grow up just south of Pittsburgh, you really don't have a choice.
Yeah,
exactly. Especially when you grow up in the 70s. So that's without a doubt. So I joined the Air Force in '84 and spent 8 years in the Air Force. Was married in '85 and still married to my wonderful wife, Christina. So we just had our 37th wedding anniversary.
Congrats.
Have 2 adult sons, Brandon and Ryan. Brandon is the VP of TPA operations at HMA. Excuse me. And Ryan is the director of stop-loss marketing and implementation. So I'm
going to have to connect with Ryan because stop-loss is my jam, man. So he and I would probably hit it off. Did they intentionally come into the business? Did they fall into the business reluctantly? I'm always curious how people get into insurance in the first place.
Well, when I got out of the military, 27 years old, I guess, and stumbled into healthcare. And I spent 4 years on the provider side, and then I came to work for the family of companies that at that point included HMA. Okay. And so I've been on the payer side ever since. Both of our sons also did military stints, and when we decided that we were going to reacquire some of those assets, they were both at some point in the near future. At that point, was most likely going to be finishing up their military stint, and we didn't know if they wanted to come into the business or not, but they did, and so they've been in it since they've been out of the military. So I can't believe it. My goodness, it's been 8-9 years already. It's
well,
crazy.
It is that type of industry. Once you discover it and once you're willing to kind of see what's out there, it is a type of industry I don't see a lot of people leave. Every once in a while you hear somebody's a recovering broker or recovering whatever, but most of the time when I meet people, they've been in this industry for most of their careers, or once they got into the insurance or healthcare space, they never left. What I think is so multifaceted that it gives essentially anybody something to find that they like to do, right? Or at least willing to do and willing to trade their time for money for a paycheck.
Well, and I think that's the key point. It's just massive.
Yeah,
there's so many different components to it, different nooks and crannies, different paths you can take. So yeah, it definitely is a crazy industry, but it definitely offers something for anyone that is looking for something. It's out there somewhere.
Oh yeah,
sure.
It's definitely out there. I've been telling these guys, Weston and Nathan, they've heard so much insurance talk. I'm like, eventually you guys are gonna be qualified just to walk right in and get a job with everything that you've heard. But you can do anything here. And so we're gonna talk the TPA space though, right? So ultimately HMA, is that safe to say that is your space, is the third party administration space? I know there's a lot more on top of that, but is that the nugget of what you do predominantly? Yeah,
I would definitely characterize it as the health plan administration space.
Okay.
With the TPA function being a part of it.
I see.
Not a overall
So draw me a distinction then. So the health plan administration space, how does that differ in your mind from the TPA?
Well, interesting question. So the way I spend a lot of time talking with people that are very innovative. They have very innovative ideas, concepts. They want to do things differently. They want to build different models. And so when I meet with folks like that, obviously I gravitate to them because that they're not a BUCA dominant type mentality. But I also bring them back to reality. And the reality is, and to get to your question is, let's just say that we put a banker's box on the coffee table here, and we build it and we write your name on top of it. So we take off the lid and it's empty. Well, there are certain things you have to have in that box. And to put it in a football analogy, if you start from, the goal line to get to the red zone, to the other 20-yard line, there are things that you have to have in that box. If you don't have a health plan. So that is your claims administration, customer service, provider network, account management, financial services, accounting services, in our case, advocacy, medical management, health services. I mean, these are core, fundamental health plan administrative services that have to be in that box.
Makes sense.
And we at HMA, we do all of those things under the four corners of our company.
So I've heard this terminology thrown about like alternative health plan, or a replacement health plan. Is that a fitting kind of naming convention for what you do? Like thinking of it, we're almost offering everything as a solution or an alternative solution to what I get as a fully insured plan. Is that kind of close, or I'm off the mark there?
I mean, mechanically, yes.
Okay.
But what you're missing is the last 20 yards.
Okay. So what's in that last 20?
So we filled up 80% of that box.
Okay.
You got to have it.
Yep.
The last 20% is where innovation comes in. And that's where the sky's the limit for what people want to do, what their thoughts are, how they want to attack different deficiencies, whatever. And now they can go in and score the touchdown, but they don't have to worry about the blocking and tackling and the health plan administration services that got us to the 20-yard line.
Okay.
In the carrier space, they own that box.
Yeah.
They're not going to allow you to put anything else in that box. If you want to do something else in that box, the answer is no, unless you have tens of thousands of lives that they are in fear of losing. In the other 99% of us in humanity, we're not afforded that opportunity.
Sure.
So we have to be creative. We have to be willing to say, sure, let's figure out a way to make that work.
Okay.
But that's sort of our claim to fame, is being able to bring under our company umbrella all of the core services that you need, and then allow people to really get crazy with how they want to score that touchdown.
So basically it's the Pareto principle, right? You're offering the 80-20. This one's
Yep.
a football analogy, right? The 80% is what you have to have, and the 20% we let you be creative.
Exactly.
To customize, right? Really just customize the solution. And the alternative, right, that box that you're referring to is those BUCAs don't even let you see what's in the box most of the time. You don't even get to open that box. It's there, and you can either pay for it or not, but you don't get to open it.
Trust me, if you put your name on their box, it's in disappearing ink, because your name's not allowed on that box.
Yeah, fair enough. Like, okay, guys, stop talking about the box, right? So 27 years in this business, man, I imagine there's been a lot of morphing over time of what you are responsible for, as well as what problems you're trying to solve. So I realize that's a long span of time to abbreviate a summary, but kind of tell me what you started doing, and then maybe what it looks like versus what you're doing today, and how that might have differed quite a bit.
We've always been in the administrative space, the provider network space. Those are core competencies. We've always managed and handled our own medical management health services function at our companies. Up until 2011, we actually owned insurance companies in multiple states. So we had 2.5 decades of managing regulated carrier plans where
you were the risk taker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that gives you a whole different view on life. But I'll tell you, coming into this industry back in the early 90s, one of the most interesting things that I can tell you that's differing today than what it has been. Healthcare has always had its ebbs and flows, and it's sort of like a power struggle. At some point, the payers seem to have the upper hand, and the providers don't, and the providers figure out ways, and they'll flip that script, and it's sort of this ebb and flow that's always happened. But it's always been in 5-10 year cycles.
Okay.
I mean, it's sort of a bell curve type thing. What has happened since COVID? It's been like a cardiac arrhythmia.
Okay.
It has been an absolute roller coaster ride over the past few years, because things have moved so dramatically faster. And I guess you can blame just about anything on, you can probably blame global warming on COVID, but I can tell you right now, COVID is a major factor in how quickly things are changing today within the healthcare space.
Oh, I can attest to that. I've mentioned this, I think, once or twice before. We're both salespeople, right? So this instantaneous move to virtual selling and Zoom, right?
Yep.
And then you going, well, I don't want to do this. And then going, well, either I have to do this or I'm not going to adapt because everybody else is doing it, right? And there's all of a sudden you're not participating in any sort of sales conversations.
Exactly.
And so now my world 2 years later is 11, 12, 13 meetings on the calendar a day, right? Of just pumping out conversations, which part of me is going massively efficient.
Yep.
The other part of me is going, that's a lot of intellectual energy to expend on a daily basis, and is it sustainable? And then you have the pullback of like, am I seeing people anymore? Is there a social element? The screen can only do so much, right, for social interaction. This podcast is brought to you by True Captive Insurance, a premier medical stop-loss captive for employer groups ranging from 25 to 1,000 employees. True Captive believes in healthcare that is personal and insurance that isn't complicated. That's why they take a white glove approach, making it easy for employer groups to transition into a program built specifically for them. Check them out at truecaptive.com. So that's probably a rabbit hole that I think you and I could probably go down pretty significantly, but I'll avoid that for the conversation today. But I want to talk about, you were talking traditionally, and you had conversations with brokers. We were having this conversation beforehand, where the expectation is you outsource everything outside of just the TPA adjudication. Your mentality is more to have those solutions in-house, right? So how do you think that positions you as a differentiator to have medical management, disease management, claims adjudication, advocacy, all of that inside of your umbrella rather than handing it off to somebody else?
Well, I mean, I'm completely biased.
That's okay. You can insert your bias on this podcast.
Because, it obviously is one of the key differentiators for us. But I find it a very difficult, if not impossible, argument to make, where you're saying it's more efficient, it's more effective, it's a better member and client experience having to work with multiple different vendors. Mm-hmm. This is just from the client-facing side. For sure. Than an integrated solution. But when you move into the operational and the technology aspect of it, the data exchange element of what has to go on, I mean, one of the craziest things about us is, even though we perform all of the healthcare services within our company for the vast majority of our clients, we still have over 110 EDI transaction files that we manage on a daily basis. That's how many different Ben admin systems or POP management or Cobra vendors, what have you. Sure. It's really a crazy number. But once again, if people in that 20-yard box, they want to add this and add that, that means we have there that doesn't happen through smoke signals. You got to have that data exchange. I am a massive believer in the integrated model, and I'll, if you don't mind, can I give you a visualization?
Please. Yeah.
So anytime I think we're gonna probably dive into value-based pricing or transparency or what have you. Yep. So, there are lots of different definitions of that. We'll get to that in a little bit. But any kind of program out there that talks about advocacy or member engagement, you try to get the member engaged. You try to. And, as a plan matures and you get into that second renewal cycle and that third, now the members have been reprogrammed from where we are programmed today as healthcare consumers, which is I don't have to do any of this stuff. But until then, it's hit and miss whether a member will actually engage with the advocate. Yes. But here's what does happen. 99.9% of the time across the country, every day, providers are calling the TPA for benefits and eligibility. They want to know that the member's eligible. They want to know it's a covered benefit, all that kind of stuff. And the other thing that's going to happen all the time, every day, is for higher cost services, the provider's going to call to see if they need to get, and if they do, request a prior authorization. So the power of integration in our world is when that provider, when the member engages with the advocate, life is good. When that provider calls us, but if the member doesn't and that provider calls us, which they will do for benefits and eligibility, they're calling the TPA, which has the advocacy function in our world called ADVANTA, right there. So our staff is able to know that this is a value-based pricing service, answer the question, but get that case to the advocate. And now, instead of the member going in, we're able to go out from the advocate. And the same thing happens on the medical management side. When they call for a prior authorization, they're calling our clinical management staff, and they're equipped to do the same thing. Right. So while they review it from a medical appropriateness standpoint, they also get that case into the advocate, who can now start working that case. So
there's intervening.
Exactly. Okay. That's the power of integration. If you have an advocacy program that is constantly playing catch up, very ineffective, very inefficient, you got a lot of angry people. But if you have a model that allows you to stay in front of that as much as humanly possible, Obviously, the emergency room situation is always the catch-all or issue for anybody. But for non-emergency situations, if you catch those things in the advocacy function immediately, your chance of success goes through the roof.
Yeah, then there's a certain level of cohesion that comes with that integrated
100%.
model, right? And yeah, so we could debate the merits that if you had somebody that goes for a non-integrated model and, hey, I get to pull in this best vendor for this and this best vendor for that, maybe so. As a standalone vendor, they might be the best at that one particular thing, but how interoperable are they with those other 7 things that need to be connected, right? Or need to have one person that knows how to, pick and choose between those things to get the person to the right place, right? You have a layer of disconnect when you don't have it all integrated in one model. So again, I'm not necessarily advocating for one or the other, but logically speaking, it makes more sense to have more integration. However, you could say, well, the most integrated model is a BUCA model, right? Because everything's integrated. So there's a downside to total integration when there's not the visibility in between those layers as well.
Well, I kind of look at it a little differently.
Okay, please. Hey, please tell me a counterpoint.
Well, the counterpoint is in the BUCA world, that's their box, and you're not going to change anything.
Right.
So yeah, they bring total integration, but they bring total control.
Of course.
But even in the non-integrated, integrated, self-funded administration world, you still have that 20%.
Yeah.
And when you have multiple vendors trying to work, you are making that 80% harder.
Okay.
And that makes the last 20% harder.
Yeah.
There's just a natural ebb and flow and a natural evolution to what happens when you're working with multiple vendors. It just is. I mean, I feel like I've been doing this a long enough time that I'm speaking from real life experiences.
Sure.
And anytime I talk with people around the country, I always talk about what is real, like what is really real on the street.
Yes.
I live in a very pragmatic world, not a theoretical world.
Yes.
There's a lot of different things out there that frankly, 20 years from now may be the norm, but they're not the norm today. And so, how do we maximize what we do today while the younger generation, such as yourself, gives us that bridge to the future without blowing everything up today?
Yeah. You don't need. There's always this weird mindset is like, if something is not perfect, let's implode it and start over. It's like, no. Let's just work on the 1 or 2 things that aren't perfect, right? And fix those, right? There's this mindset of I probably went through this when I was younger as well. It's like, let's tear it all down and let's start over. It's like, no, you can't do that, right?
No.
So let's
easier said than done.
Or let's extract the pieces that don't work.
In
healthcare, for sure.
We're not talking about something small. We're not talking about something that's impersonal.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about large and personal.
Large and personal, for sure. Well, and I want to go back to, you mentioned the ADVANTA solution earlier. Can you give me a little bit more detail on what that solution actually is?
That is our fully integrated advocacy and Medicare pricing component.
Okay.
So we built it. It's our in-house full service, pre-service, post-service advocacy. And I'll tell you what, I would put those guys up against anyone out there, and our own technology Medicare pricing. So we actually, when we started it, I tried to do it under the HMA name, and people just couldn't wrap their head around. Like, okay, so who does your advocacy? Well, we do. Well, I know you're the TPA, but who does your? Well, we do. And I mean, we just got to the point where we just said, you know what, we got to brand this thing. So that's what we did, and we called it ADVANTA, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful part of our entire product offering, and they do frankly remarkable work every single day.
Well, I was going to say, it's funny you mentioned that. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine in the industry the other day, and I was talking about how difficult it is for what I do for behavioral change. I've got to deal with human behavior and the psychology of getting them to do a new way of doing an RFP, for instance. So part of me is going, well, there's resistance to behavior change. And he was saying, well, maybe if you just understand human behavior rather than try to alter it, work around it, accept that the human behavior is X, solve for X rather than trying to change X. So what you're describing is just change it to.
Can I use that?
Please do.
Maybe
I'll turn that into a clip.
I mean, our integrated model is accepting human behavior, and we're working around.
Well, that's exactly that's why it triggered that thought. I'm like, you just kind of renamed it, right, if you will, but it didn't necessarily change what you were delivering. It just changed the way people understood what you were delivering by having another name or separate name for it. Also, people like branding. It's the ADVANTA solution. People like to be able to name it something, and I totally get that. Can we go into, I know you alluded to this earlier, value-based pricing, reference-based pricing. Real briefly, if you don't mind, describe what that is. So in case somebody's never heard of that before and is listening to this podcast, what does that mean?
Well, there's a lot of different definitions people can use, a lot of technical definitions. I'll just give you what it really means. There's really kind of two ways that healthcare is priced these days. One is built off of what the provider charges, which is unknown. That's not something that's readily available. What their charge master is, it's a closely held secret. And I know that there have been some recent legal things that have, regulatory things that have been put into place. We'll see how effective they are once they, because they've just literally been rolled out. But it's an unknown charge down approach. Okay. Anything that is built around reference-based or value-based type of reimbursements is you're basically saying we don't want that reimbursement model, an unknown charge down reimbursement model. We want to use something tangible, and one of the most readily available data points and programs that you have available is their cost. And so you go from a known cost up approach as opposed to an unknown charge down. To put it in sort of layperson's terms, if you're shopping at your local department store and you see a blouse or something there, and you kind of like it, you like the color, you like the look, and it's got something that says 30% off, and you go up and you say, boy, I like this. They have your size, and then you go check out. Well, if they say, okay, that's going to be $450, well, wait a second, it's 30% off. Yeah, but the retail price is this. You're probably not going to buy that sweater. What they're going to tell you when you make that purchasing decision is what that 30% off is actually off of. You don't get that in healthcare. So at its core, that's what any kind of appropriately built value-based pricing model is. It's not taking a discount off bill charge that you don't know. And how do you quantify that? How do you underwrite? How do you do actuarial work based off of that? And you just know you're starting your analysis and your pricing model from something that's much more tangible, much more specific approach.
I love that. So that's the bottom up. I've heard it called a bottom up approach too, which it makes a cost up. Yeah.
Bottom up has like a negative connotation.
Let's not have people picturing bottoms up right now.
Exactly. Well, or bottom feeder providers, because that's not what this is about. This is just starting with the reimbursement. We know your cost is X, so we want to go from there up.
Well, and it's a logical way to explain, like you said, to a layperson, say, oh, this is why we charge this, because this is what our costs are. Here's our layer of profit or whatever else needs to be in that margin. But you go, oh, well, that's tangible. That makes sense why you did that. This podcast is sponsored by PlanSight. PlanSight is a technology for employee benefits brokers to more efficiently manage their RFP process for any group size, all funding types, and over 20 benefit lines and point solutions. PlanSight is the only end-to-end RFP technology on the market today. Let's modernize your RFP process together. Check us out at plansight.com. Can you differentiate? Some people use VBP, value-based pricing, versus RBP, reference-based pricing. Why is the terminology different, or are they essentially just the same thing?
Well, VBP is a newer name. RBP was what was used by the original people organizations that did this type of stuff. Very negative connotation because they had a very bad model. I mean, they just did. When we started dipping our toe into this type of space back in 2013-ish, no matter where we went, it was always messy. And it wasn't because the concept didn't work. It had nothing to do with the fact that it didn't save people money. It's a great concept. It's absolutely going to be the reimbursement model for decades within healthcare, But the way that they went about it just was bad, and they caused enormous grief, enormous pressure across, and everybody just, it became such a negative connotation, the term RBP. So they're very similar in mechanically, but philosophically, the RBP thing is kind of really, really old school. I don't really know of anybody that's doing true what you would call RBP circa 2014 anymore, because it's
so what's the value layer that's now being added, or how does that repackage it into being a better incentive model?
It's so much more heavily weighted on advocacy and doing it before the service is rendered. So can I give you an example,
please?
Because this is an actual story, but I'll just give you the shortcut that happened. So you asked a minute ago, like, what does value-based pricing, what's it mean? Well, here's what it means to me, okay, and to the members. This was a story that happened with a prospect that a hospital administrator had written this prospect a letter and said that we understand you're looking at reference-based pricing models. We wanted to let you know we would not participate. And the analogy that was used in the letter was, if you owned a car lot, you would not allow a consumer to walk on your car lot, you give them the keys to the car, and 45 days later, they tell you how much they're going to pay you for it. That's old school RBP right there, after the fact. And said, you wouldn't do it in your business model, don't expect us to do it in ours. And so what do I think about that? Well, I agree 100%. But there's the second part of the story, and this is what will fundamentally change over the next 2 decades of our life. And I promise you, there's a lot of people out there, probably a lot of people that are going to be watching this podcast, that we're plowing the fields when the BUCAs deem, okay, it's time for us to join, they will be the ones that invented it. And everybody will be like, okay, yeah, they invented it. No, they fought it for 2 decades, but now they'll get 100% credit. But, you know, I'll get off my soapbox there.
You can be on a soapbox on this podcast.
But getting back to the other side of the story. So we said, if you owned a car lot, you would not allow a customer to walk on your car lot. You give them the keys, and 45 days later, they tell you how much they're going to pay. Okay. The second part is, if you are a consumer, you do not walk on a car lot, sign your life away on 18 different documents, size 6 font. They give you the keys to the car, and 45 days later tell you owe them $200,000 for something you could have bought for $50,000.
Right.
That is it. I mean, like, okay, yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. Nobody's buying a car unless they know what the price is. Well, I can tell you right now, you want to impact the overall cost of healthcare today, like immediately, you have that philosophy embedded and throughout the membership and throughout all of us as consumers, because that is the absolute opposite of how we buy healthcare today. And it's people use the term status quo, and I mean, my goodness, definition of status quo can be as much as you want. But I will tell you, the singular thing that no one from the provider side or the BUCA side want to change is for the consumer to have the audacity to say, how much is this going to cost? Because when that happens, their entire leverage goes away. Their entire leverage. And, another thing that ties right into that, if you ask a consumer, how much did it cost you? Inevitably, they are going to say what their deductible or co-insurance was. They are ignoring the overall cost. Well, guess what? The overall cost of that care is borne by the employer,
of course it is,
borne by the member, and when they actually receive the service. But you know where else it's borne by the member? Through payroll deduction, because they're taking home less in their paycheck, because their health care costs more with the employer because the overall price of that service was too high.
Well, and that's what, so we were talking transparency a little bit before. Just
that's
like
transparency.
Giving the member transparency, but it's transparency that goes both directions, right? Transparency into what is charged, what I owe, things like that, but also transparency into what you're costing your employer by making certain choices as well. That's why I like some of the programs that are out there that give the members certain incentives to go one place or the other. And I think you guys have that. Probably I didn't even mean to lead into the next question, but that's kind of, I know you have a zero out-of-pocket incentive model. So talk to me how you're using that incentive model to drive choice.
Well, I mean, any employer that's looking to do anything innovative has to reward the members financially. You can reward them financially via lower payroll deductions, means you're covering more of their healthcare premium or premium equivalent cost, or you can reward them through lower out-of-pocket when they actually receive health care. And I mean, there are employers that are really innovative out there that have, they even take it a step further. If you have a member that has, let's say more of a catastrophic ongoing condition, and they may meet their out-of-pocket expense where they no longer would be financially incentivized to choose better. They actually turn it into an income stream. They'll reimburse the member, a percentage of what they save if the member continues to be better purchasers. And really, that's all we're talking about here. We're talking about become a better purchaser as a member of healthcare services. It is crazy. It is asinine. It is blasphemy today. It will become the norm. The younger generation, I say this in jest, but I really don't mean it in jest. They will sit back 15 years from now, people that are 30, 35 years old right now are going to look back and say, remember when people used to buy healthcare and they had no idea what the cost was?
Right.
And everybody, and then the 25, 30 year olds at that point are be like, oh, no, that never would happen. Well, that's how we do it today.
Yeah. When I heard it speculated that there might be 40 to 50%, pork built into the healthcare consumption equation in terms of charges and how much people are paying with that model that you've described, right? So don't know what I'm paying, charge master bills, whatever. I get a discount off of that price, and then the actual pay charges are X. Could there be, with visibility, transparency, with the CAA, with things like VBP, could there be an exposure of how big that delta is on an aggregate scale where people go, well, wait a second, we've been paying double, triple what the actual reality of what we should have been paid. And I think that goes into what you're saying is like, once there is enough people that know that that's the case, there's enough anger, I think, on the other side of that knowledge becomes the actual groundswell, I think, that is needed. Because I would imagine it could be more than 50%. Who knows exactly what that number is? And maybe I'm a little bit aggressive in that assumption, but I think it's got to be somewhere in that range.
Well, time will tell, and the actuarial industry will let us know that answer when they get the data. But here's what I will say. Okay. That if you are buying services, and so if you are really concerned about the overall cost of your health plan today, obviously there are a ton of different things that go into that. But the two things that really move the needle is how are you handling high-cost medical services known as facility-based services, high-cost diagnostics services, those kinds of things. In other words, I'm not talking about the physician, typical ancillary, local lab type of stuff. You have to address the high-cost medical side of the house, and you have to have a strong program to attack the specialty drug initiative. And when you do those two things, you are attacking what is, encompassing maybe 20% of the encounters that are out there, but you're attacking 80% of the cost.
Oh yeah.
So the 80% of the, does it really? It doesn't move the needle if you're reimbursing hospitals doctors an average of 120% of Medicare versus 125%. I mean that is like your gas gauge moving after you drove 20 miles. Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't move. But if you say we're going to eliminate 30% of the cost on the facility side of the house, now you have a material impact on the overall cost of your health plan today. And there are a lot of different things out there that are always going to be an investment, things that will absolutely bend that cost curve in the future, like great population health management programs, a wellness initiative, all of these kinds of things. They are investments in the future. The transparency, value-based pricing services, the advocacy services today that are out there now, they attack the cost today.
Okay. Well, so let me ask you a more philosophical question, because it sounds like what HMA does is pretty vast. So do you have difficulty because there's so much under this umbrella of communicating that simply to uneducated or less sophisticated, let's say, buyer, right? That's accustomed to an easy button style health plan. How do you simplify that messaging to make it? Is that the $1 trillion question, the $1 billion question? You know?
Well, I'll get to the end game first.
Okay.
And that is, you better figure it out.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if you sell and implement these kinds of programs like you would a BUCA program, you're setting yourself up for a problem in the future. The implementation of these types of things is so massively important, okay? But once again, you are talking to a person that is fully on board with the integrated model. And so what I would counter with is to say, what do you think would be a harder way to implement a group? If you have multiple different vendors and they're talking about what they do, and I mean, I got to tell you something. You can have a medical management firm talking about their medical management piece. They can do a 2-hour presentation about the medical management piece alone versus the integrated model, and you can say, here's your advocate. Yeah, these are the pictures of your advocate. This is the customer service people that you'll engage with. So the real answer to the question is, you better have the materials. You better be committed to it. Pre-COVID, we actually had a corporate policy that any group that had at least 75 employees, we would have an on-site representative. We mandated to have an on-site representative at an open enrollment thing. But some pitfalls that you find out there is the infamous, I forget what it's called, but auto enrollment. You know, I forget what you don't have to do anything. This is the benefit plan. We'll auto enroll you. People that are out there, and you hear employer groups say these kinds of things, you got to say, pump the brakes. That can't happen. We can't do this without people understanding what is active. So here's the deal. These types of programs absolutely save money, and I don't mean a little bit of money. They absolutely save money. That is the what. It is very easy to sell the what. It is much harder to sell the how. Okay. And you have to be able to educate and sell. Okay, nothing in life is free. If you want exactly the same thing you have today and you want to save 20%, that's magic. Unfortunately, healthcare is built on math. So the how we achieve those savings has to be understood. And the way we do it is we are very focused. We are focused on high-cost medical services and the specialty drug issue. And we want as little to no disruption on anything else. We don't want people to feel uncomfortable taking their kid to their pediatrician or their family doctor. We want them to think differently before they go to a hospital, for example, in a non-emergent situation. So we are very focused on, now there are people out there that'll say, well, you're leaving a lot of meat on the bone, and they very well could be right 10 years from now. Yeah. But I will tell you, the very focused model we have still causes disruption. It still causes member angst because they've never had to do it before.
We're on a mission to partner with the most innovative companies in America to fix health benefits, one plan at a time. NavMD has created a blueprint that delivers world-class benefits to 155 million Americans. Better benefits starts with data intelligence. Our platform is empowering the next generation of advisors to zero in on opportunities to optimize the plan, build the right team, implement proven strategies and solutions. Join us on our journey to revolutionize health benefits. Let NavMD put you a step ahead.
Well, and see that when you talk about the what and the how, I think that comes down to the why component, right? Well, why are we doing these things, right? Well, why are we doing these things? Because we're on an unsustainable cost curve. Why are we doing these things? Because your premium keeps going up and your paycheck keeps getting smaller. Why are we doing these things? Because the cost of healthcare is going up so precipitously that we cannot keep this up and we have to do something different. So if you can communicate that, and that's why I'm always kind of surprised when a broker often will say, well, yeah, sometimes our employers don't even let their members know that they're self-funded. I'm going, well,
no,
ridiculous. Why wouldn't you let them
that's
know?
Terrible.
Because then all of a sudden now they know actually behind the scenes how things operate and how they can actually be a part of this, the whole, for their employer to save money, lower their premium, lower their cost of care, et cetera, et cetera. It was bizarre when I've heard a couple people say that. I'm like, well, why wouldn't the member know? Because now they know what they're doing as the bigger picture for their employer.
But the other side of that coin is if they're with a carrier in an ASO arrangement, a BUCA, guess what? The BUCAs want them to be perceived as, like, you will not see, well, you know what you see on a carrier ASO agreement's ID card? If they're with Anthem, Anthem.
Yep.
You see Cigna. Yeah, I mean, they don't even put employer names on. It's one of the things that, and that's not a recent phenomenon. That's been around forever, and it really irritates me because when you're self-funded, they're a vendor. Like you're hiring someone to be your administrator. Yeah. It's not their plan. It's your plan. Yeah, and in any employers that don't take advantage of that, I mean, they're missing a really big mark. But the other thing that I think, once again, to get it down into real life, we have conversations, and we can have conversations across the country with like-minded individuals. And what you said just a minute ago about the cost, it just makes all the sense in the world. But hey, you get down there in front of the rank and file people, the membership, the employees, and especially a larger type organization, you know what they're thinking? They're not thinking it's saving me money on my payroll deductions. They're not thinking I have the ability to get free health care. They're not thinking this helps the company out. They're thinking I work for a cheap company and they're buying a cheap health plan. Yeah. And these are just the real life things that you have to break through. And you know how you do it? You communicate. Yeah. You're there during the implementation. You make it a real thing. You make it a real personal thing. And then people will say, oh, you know what? Yeah, okay, I get it. And going back to my box example, you make sure you are ready to tell them why this thing is so much better, which is that last 20%. Yeah. Here are the things that we didn't have with our carrier-based program that we now have, because we can do it instead of being told, no, we can't.
Well, and that's what the incentivization model adds, that mutual benefit, because the reason an employer wants to steer in one direction is not only hopefully, and it should be, the quality of care is going to be higher, but also the cost of care is going to be lower. So incentivize the member because their share is relatively small. So they win. I win as an employer, and all you have to do is communicate. That's the why component in that equation.
100%.
So let's zoom back out, man. And I know we're man, what have we been, 45 minutes ish, probably something like that. And I really appreciate you coming in from Arizona to do this, man. So Paul, you gave me a little bit of the big picture before, but I want to elaborate further on kind of what you think the future of the next 5 or 10 years will look like, right? As you see maybe the generation like mine and maybe even younger than me that are starting to get involved in this and trying to tinker around and fix this thing. So outside of the value-based care maybe model you believe might be the standard in the future, what other things do you envision will kind of change outcomes in our industry?
Well, I'm a huge believer in cash. and I really think that the cash reimbursement model is going to come where, prior to into the 80s and before, cash was king. 90s, 2000s, and up until today, because of the impact and the influence of the carriers and the domination of a handful of payers, cash has become a secondary thought, even a third, fourth level thought.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, even as a healthcare consumer, and I don't consume it very rarely, most people don't even know that you can ask for a cash-based price, right? Yeah.
And there are just so many unbelievably wonderful things that come up when you're able to pay cash for a service. First of all, you're able to efficiently leverage with the providers that they don't have to collect any money from the member, other than the cash pay. And then the other thing is that, they don't have they gain unbelievable efficiencies, and they don't have to bill, they don't have to collect, they get their cash before the service is rendered. So I am a big proponent of any kind of innovation. I'll put it to you this way, my belief. When you talk with people out there about value-based pricing, they will inevitably say the issue with value-based pricing is balance bills. Not in our world. Our issue is not balance bills because of the model that we do. I will tell you the biggest issue that people face, and that's access to care. When the providers start limiting access to care, now you have an issue, and it's a very difficult issue to get around. I mean, if you have a health plan system that leverages their doctors that are employees to get exorbitant reimbursement on the facility side, you have an issue. Well, I believe that one of the absolute critical aspects of addressing that issue in the next 5-10 years is cash. Being able to pay for that service before that service is rendered. No one's ever going to reject cash.
So how do we get to that being the standard then, right? And how does value-based pricing actually help us get there, you think?
Well, you got to have the cash.
Okay. Well, and we say cash, we're obviously not talking just physical cash, but the ability to, rather than go through the insurance payment model and have it submitted as a claim and be approved and the time it takes for that to happen and reimbursed based on a schedule, you're just saying, what does it cost you to deliver this service to me today, and what will you take as a profit margin? What does that number look like? I pay you, right?
Yeah.
So, but that could be employer pays cash out of like a fund. That could be a swipe a card that is a cash, right? So it's not necessarily just physical cash.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean it that it would replace the payer system under any circumstance. I mean, because the dollars are, they're enormous. What I'm talking about, when you run into an access to care issue, being able to say, what if I paid you today? That is something that is, there's people out there, we actually do that inside of our company. And I know that there are a few other companies out there that have went out and raised some capital, because you got to have the cash to be able to do that. But I really think that the biggest issue that we face today is access to care, and I really think the cash payment, ability to pay cash when necessary, is a absolute first step in the process to address that. Well, then that comes down to the payment mechanism itself, right? And how do you have the funds available to execute on a very large claim today? Right. So you're saying there's some companies that are kind of exploring that space of how to fund that. Okay. That's interesting. What about your vision of what HMA does, in relation to what your vision of the future is? How do you guys continue to play a part in delivering on that future that you're describing? Well, pretty interesting question. This business is dominated by a handful of very large clients or companies. And I get asked all the time, who do you compete with? And I say, we compete against the BUCAs. And people are like surprised. They're the BUCAs. Well, when a set of organizations have an 80% market share, you don't have to really go looking for, who they service. Yes. So there are a lot of other organizations out there that that do innovative things very similar to what we do. And I think that there's going to be consolidation within that. Okay. It's getting harder out there to compete. Yeah, I bet. As a smaller organization. It's whether you're a smaller, even in the brokerage world, there are companies that are going out and buying up. The acquisition strategy that's out there. It's hard to keep up with. It's hard to keep up with. The idea of organic growth is like taking a backseat. I think further consolidation is likely. I absolutely believe with 100% certainty that value-based pricing is here. It's here to stay, and it will evolve into new kind of visions of itself. But the days of going to the reimbursement pricing model that was prevalent in the 90s and 2000, there is just no way people can afford that today.
Well, yeah, so listening to how you say how you compete with that, what it comes down to something I learned. I used to do acting classes a long time ago, and the idea was like, well, how do you win an audition, right? Well, if you're an unknown quantity and they don't just hand you a role, how do you win it? You're undeniable in your performance that day. So if you can be undeniable in the value that you're delivering to the marketplace, that's how you compete, right? Is this somebody comes to you and goes, well, there is no denying that was the right choice that we made. We saved gobs of money. Member experience is better. That trickles out, right? That referral type business, and people talk about it. If you're undeniable in what you deliver, then you're able to compete even against the Goliaths of the world. So what I'll say is this, Paul, why don't you help me wrap it up? Closing thoughts. We've had a great conversation. It's probably been close to about an hour or so. So what do you want to leave the audience with that's listened so far?
Well, I want to thank you for your attention. It's been thank you for
it's fun getting to know you too, man. Yeah,
inviting me. We didn't get into much of the stop loss stuff, so
why don't we do that round two when you get in the RV next year and come back?
Exactly. Well, because we can spend more than an hour on that stuff alone.
Yeah.
But I would just say that there are innovative things out there. Some are really, really radical. The more radical, the more disruption. Frankly, I'm not a fan of that because, frankly, we're the ones that are on the front lines and we have to deal with the angry members and whatnot. I prefer to really focus on what does matter financially, which is the high-cost medical stuff and the specialty drug aspect. I think that creates the ability to get in a much less disruptive manner to the members. And I guess the last thing I'll say is there are people, lots of people, that talk about changing healthcare, and that healthcare is too expensive and no one can afford it. Well, talking about it and theorizing solutions, frankly, is easy. Deploying those solutions in the real world with real members becomes far more complicated. So I think understanding that issues will happen and being in an environment and frankly working with people who you work with, that you're in it together, and it's not a blame game because this is disruptive, and the people that we compete with they want it to be exactly the way it is today. And we will and we do face headwinds collectively. So work together, and we'll look back as these philosophical change take hold. We'll look back 10 years from now and say, remember when? Yeah.
Well, I hope that we lament the day that's like, how did we ever tolerate that status quo, right? Hopefully that we'll get to look back and say that's the case. Well, so Paul, I appreciate you again. Thanks for making the trek. Please tell Madeline I said hello. I know you're going to see her tonight as well. And then safe travels up to Pittsburgh also.
Thank you very much.
All right, man. My pleasure. Talk soon. True Captive believes in healthcare that is personal and insurance that isn't complicated. Check them out at truecaptive.com.